Oh boy, I need good movies after that shitty Batman vs Superman.
And I'm a huge fan of the way you lose control and turn into an enormous green rage monster.
Yeah, Marvel will do. Do you know that there are 12 films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? That's not even considering the 2 TV shows with a third on the way, 2 Netflix series with 3 more on the way, and numerous comic books that tie into all the movies. It's kinda crazy to think about if you ask me. But have you actually sat down and re-watched all of them recently? Sometimes sequels can take the magic out of the originals. Don't believe me? Look at the Call of Duty franchise and Paranormal Activity. Iron Man was the first film to set off this giant spark of an idea, and honestly, it's still excellent. Surprisingly, with all the sequels and other films in the MCU coming out, this still holds up as one of the best films out of the entire universe, as well as just one of the best comic book movies in general. It has a great aesthetic while still having a good heart and just being generally fun to watch. Its more dramatic moments are just as good as its more comedic moments, the effects are great, and there's a certain feeling that this movie evokes that just makes it enjoyable. It's a time before aliens, before gods, psychics, before every single one of these films had to set up the next one. Robert Downey Jr. and Gwyneth Paltrow deserve so much praise for their performances, and I love where they took their characters. Even if you hate the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I would highly recommend checking this one out. The tone is so different than all of the other movies. The only way I can describe this one is just pure fun. That's it. Fun. I'd give it a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I can fly.
This movie everybody forgets is even a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is shocking to me because this film is honestly really freaking great. The Incredible Hulk is a film that was written as both a sequel and a reboot to that terrible Ang Lee film. Thanks to that thinking, we get the whole issue of an origin story out of the way and can focus on using the character to tell an interesting story. Hulk as a concept is awesome and crazy, and I love the way that this film portrays him. This is also my favorite looking on-screen Hulk that we've ever seen. Edward Norton does such a great job as Bruce Banner and is honestly my favorite portrayal of him. The story is less of an action-y film than the others in the MCU and is more focused as a character study of Bruce Banner. It's a great dissection of who he is and what he feels, and honestly feels a lot more mature than any of the other films I'll be reviewing in this marathon. Even though this is one movie that people tend to skip, that would honestly be a stupid thing to do. This is one of the ones I say to watch because even in the cinematic universe, you won't get an interpretation of the Hulk like this again. For that alone, this is worth a watch. This gets an 8 out of 10.
Hulk! Smash!
The only sequel that we have from Phase 1 helps sets the tone that the rest of the MCU decided to take, such as S.H.I.E.L.D. being a major player within the story, as well as setting up the next movie. This movie still has a lot of the same badassness, comedy, and other aspects that made me love the first Iron Man so much, but for some reason, I just can't get behind this one as much as I could the original. I can't explain what about it, but it just feels a bit more empty than the first Iron Man. Like there was a lot less for Tony to do and less ways for Tony to grow as a character. I feel that they may have something to do with the villains of the film, Whiplash and Justin Hammer, that while I feel their characters were fun, sometimes they felt like they were just a side story to something much larger. The real story here is Tony's own personal journey. Personally, I feel like that could have carried the film in and of itself, but when the film does focus on Whiplash, it seems boring to me. His motivation seems a bit forced and is just an excuse to fight another guy in a suit. But at the same time, while it isn't my favorite, there are still a lot of things I do enjoy about it. The character interactions are still there, and the performances are still top-notch. It just feels like it's missing that same spark that made the first Iron Man so excellent. This gets a 7 out of 10.
Iron Man, the suit and I are one.
I've never seen a film that wasn't an origin story for a character suddenly force itself to be an origin story. Out of every film in Phase 1, Thor's probably my least favorite. To me, Thor the character isn't interesting enough to make Thor the movie work well. That'll become a lot more apparent later, but in this movie, he's at least entertaining, because I feel it's the only one where Thor actually grows as a character. The story, I feel, is very weak and lacking, with Thor being a very passive protagonist for a majority of the movie. The only thing he really contributes to the film is being a funny fish-out-of-water experience. The real star of the show is Loki. I would love to see a whole film based on him, and he does make an excellent villain. I just wish he had a stronger protagonist to play against him in the movie. This is also the first film in the cinematic universe that I felt started to go super heavily on the CGI binge, to the point where it just became visually uninteresting by the end of it. The final fight was just boring because of the over-reliance on the CGI. I've never liked when films forego physical sets for CGI rooms, and endings like this are why. I know it sounds like I'm really bashing this movie, and that's honestly more to make up for how much I gushed about it back when it came out in 2011. Trust me, don't watch that video. It's a terrible video, and I'm an annoying brat in high school. The film isn't all bad, but it doesn't do too much to actually impress me. This gets a 5 out of 10.
Oh no, this is isn't it?
Captain America: The First Avenger is the biggest departure of the very loose style that Marvel had with these movies. Taking place in the Second World War, the film does its best to really go out of the way with its own style. It is so far removed from the other movies that it allowed the filmmakers to really get fantastical with its setting. This is a weird thing to say about this movie in particular, but it's definitely the most comic booky that the MCU has ever gone. It honestly leads to a very campy style that makes me love this movie even more. Somewhere between the costuming, the effects, the montages, it all has an element of camp to it that just makes the movie seem fun and juvenile. It makes me absolutely love the movie and does a great job setting up our character. The only real issue I have with the movie stems not from this at all, but actually from what future movies have done, which is something I'll probably get into when I review Captain America: Winter Soldier, so I just won't talk about that right, especially since this does stand on its own super well. I would highly recommend checking this one out, especially if you love a lot of camp in your movies. This gets a 9 out of 10.
I'm just a kid from Brooklyn.
Everything that every single one of these movies have built up for was meant for this one cinematic event. It may be hard to think about, but there was a time when people thought that the Marvel Cinematic Universe was going to be like how the DC Extended Universe is going now. Get the fuck out of here, Batman vs Superman. But oh boy, does this movie deliver. Even though the other movies each had their own Easter eggs and references to the other films, this movie is the first time you could feel that it was one big coherent universe. The styles of each of the movies is so different from each other that when this was going to include all of the characters, most thought the movie was just going to be an incoherent mess. But what we got was just a giant explosive bag of fun. It's honestly surreal seeing this movie work so well and all these characters just acting together. The characters all play off each other so well, and it has that nice Joss Whedon touch to it. It has a lot of excitement, comedy, and it's just a general good time. I love this movie. Even if you haven't seen the other movies, it nicely reintroduces everybody back to the audience, so it can still be watched even if you haven't seen any of the other films. It won't make nearly as much sense, but this movie honestly feels like a AAA version of a crossover episode in a sitcom, and it's amazing. I would highly recommend it, trust me. This movie is fantastic. 9 out of 10.
You can be damn sure we'll avenge it.
Whew, boy, we haven't even scratched the surface yet. This was only Phase 1. Next time we will handle Phase 2. See ya, everybody.